One of the most critical questions that we need to get in the habit of asking is who benefits? And the reason why that question is important is because it is going to allow you to think through who is in position to come in to save the day when disaster strikes. So where am I going with this? One of the things that's been in the news recently is how all of these farmers who voted for Trump are now at risk of losing their farms because the Trump administration rescinded a number of grants and subsidies that the Inflation Reduction Act had put into place. And if you know anything about farming, typically farmers have to plan ahead and make their purchases and investments accordingly in the expectations that their crop is going to be brought to market and they will recoup their investments on the back end. A number of farmers are now at risk of losing their farms because those subsidies have been canceled. And these farmers voted overwhelmingly for Trump. So the question becomes, why would the Trump administration do things that deliberately hurt their voter base? In order to answer that question, you need to understand that he's not running for re-election anymore. He is running for eternal rule and the divine right of kings, and there are probably plans in place to create a succession trajectory that he can just anoint the next leader when he's tired of being in the seat. That is the grand plan for Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, and all of these religious organizations that are backing the Trump administration along with the tech bro crowd. So when you take that into account, he doesn't have to be beholden to anybody because he can operate with impunity and without fear of retribution. So when you put it in that context, you have to think about who owns Trump. One of the owners of Trump is the billionaire tech bro crowd. And one of the things that the billionaire tech bro crowd believes is tied to the butterfly revolution, which is a concept that has been brought forward by Curtis Yarvin, who is a philosopher in those tech bro circles. Curtis Yarvin is the author of the Dark Enlightenment. And this movement essentially puts forward the idea that because the tech bro oligarchy have attained a level of status and power within society, it is time for them to put down roots that prepare the world for a post-democratic future. And a post-democratic future looks essentially like what we saw in feudalistic times, where you have a very small number of elites and everybody else is a serf. And that is the future that Curtis Yarvin and all of the tech bros want to bring forward, where the rest of us, all of us working stiffs, are just cannon fodder for their factories and their initiatives while they work on trying to get off planet and go to the moon or whatever it is that they want to do. So how does that tie in with what's going on with farms? I think one of the things that you have to think about when you consider this is that it follows the same pattern that you saw in residential housing. What was happening over the last 8 years or so? You saw private equity companies and large-scale investors gobble up all sorts of single-family homes and drive the prices up because their vision is to create a society where the average person has no capital, owns nothing. So at the same time that they're gobbling up single-family homes, they're also driving up prices of rents to make things less and less affordable. And you've seen this over the last several decades where you think about what you could afford in the 80s and compare to what you can afford now. It's a completely different story. You have 70% of the population that is living paycheck to paycheck, where compared to the 80s, the 1980s, if somebody was making $28,000 a year, they were in the top 10% of income earners at that time. And when you put that into today's dollars, to have that same standard of living, a family of four needs to have at least $170K per year that they're making to maintain that same lifestyle that they had at $28K in the 80s. This is all by design. When billionaire investors and their private equity companies gobble up single-family homes, it's to depress the supply of homes in the market and drive up rents. That makes it increasingly more and more difficult for citizens to make ends meet. And that's why you see such a large number of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And that's why you also see why there is the biggest disparity of wealth between the top 1% and the 90%. Over that time frame, I've talked about the $50 trillion transfer of wealth that's happened. This is another way that's taken shape. So when you look at all of that and tie it to farms, farmers have a ton of capital. And one of the other things that billionaires want to control in order to exert as much influence on society as possible and bring forward the utopia in their mind that the Dark Enlightenment offers is to control the food supply. We already know that corporate farms account for a massive segment of the agricultural sector. What better way to consolidate even more and have more control over our food supply than to gobble up all of these farms that go under, all of the equipment that has to be sold off for pennies on the dollar? That is the play that's happening here. This is by design. And again, when you think about who owns Trump, Trump is owned by Elon Musk and his cohort of PayPal Mafia billionaires. And this is one of the ways that Trump is paying them back for keeping him out of prison. Remember, the only reason Trump ran was to stay out of prison. And now that he's in the seat, he's got to pay back the investments that have been made to the billionaires that control him, to the Heritage Foundation that controls him, and to Russia and China that controls him. So when you look at all of those control pieces exerting pressure on Trump, every single policy can be traced back to benefiting one or more of those groups. That's the game that's being played today. Understanding the game that's being played and who the players are and who benefits is really important for us so that we can recognize who is playing who against who. Right now, we are in this constant squabble between left and right. And I'm in MAGA from this discussion because they're a lost cause. They are going to go to their graves licking boots for their orange god. Everybody else needs to start looking at the billionaires and the foreign interests that have everything to gain by bringing the U.S. down and by working through the Trump administration to enrich themselves. The sooner we unite against that common cause, the better off we're going to be. It's up versus down. And all of us and everyone watching this and everyone on these apps, we're part of that 90% that needs to unite and strike back.